modalities for flexible learning.
มันมีเป็ด
We developed this particular model with two dimensions.
CCDKM ใส่
The first dimension is actually on how we actually deliver the learning resources that runs on a continuum from an online delivery to an offline delivery mode. So when we say online delivery mode in the Philippines, these are ways on how we deliver the learning materials and instruction through the use of the internet. And when we say offline delivery in the Philippines, this would actually refer to printed modules and televisions and radio signals. The second dimension on how we understand flexible learning is the distance of the learner away from the school setting, which runs in a continuum from face-to-face to distance or remote learning, where the learner is away from the school setting. This gives us about 4 quadrants on how we actually approach various flexible learning delivery modes. Q1, which is quadrant 1, and Q3, which is quadrant 3, are the usual that happen inside our classroom, face-to-face, and there's technology integration when there is online available in the school setting. And our traditional practice, face-to-face, where students make use of print materials and the teachers make use of visuals that are posted on the board inside the classroom. This is your usual Q3. The existing challenge now is how do we actually deliver modalities that belongs in Q2 and Q4, the second quadrant and the fourth quadrant. The second quadrant entails that there's still technology integration because the learning materials are delivered making use of online mode. And there's blended learning because there's now a combination of the teacher presenting asynchronous and synchronous type of learning. The teacher is present online, and some of these materials where the student will have to independently study on their own is actually facilitated by the parents. The fourth quadrant is much challenging because a large number of students, especially in the public schools in the Philippines, about 80%, according to some survey, is that they do not have online access. So Q4 is very much applicable for them, where the student is away from the school and the learning material is actually provided to them through a print module. There is actually a large amount of materials that they have to go through, and the role of the parents is very much needed here because the parents will have to build a culture of learning in the homes. The parents will have to monitor the study habits of the learner, and varied teaching and learning approaches is actually done by the parents and other community volunteers in order to facilitate the learning of the child. The teacher can also play an important role here by looking at the progress of the child through various modes, such as home visitation and looking at the sample works of the learner. Now, the question is, since this is mostly a widespread implementation of flexible learning across countries in Asia, a pressing question is, how do we actually know that flexible learning delivery will make students learn? How do we actually ensure that the students will progress towards the learning target? Many initiatives, many plans, and many policies have actually been set already, and these plans would have to be looked at on how effective we actually deliver these particular plans. And the effectivity of looking into these plans is how do we translate these policies, practices, and initiatives into student performance. Therefore, we need to look at how flexible learning actually optimizes student performance, especially inside the classroom and in various learning delivery modes. The answer to this particular question is simple. If we want to know whether flexible learning delivery will actually make our students learn inside the classroom, we need to continuously gather evidences of student performance through assessment for flexible learning. In the idea of assessment for flexible learning, if we want the teaching and the learning delivered in a flexible learning delivery mode, so as assessment. So the idea is that if we concentrate on the teaching and learning process as a flexible learning delivery, therefore assessment needs to be integrated with it because assessment provides us evidence whether students are actually going to learn and benefit from this approach. Now, let me start off first with the idea briefly on assessment for flexible learning. Then we go to the standards. The idea of assessment for flexible learning is derived from the original idea of assessment for learning. In the idea of assessment for learning, we're now making use of assessment to make students want to learn. We use assessment results to improve instruction. We use assessment to support students to achieve our learning targets. These learning targets comes in a different variety depending on our curriculum framework. In the Philippines, for the K-12, we call them the learning competencies. In higher education institutions, we call them as our course outcomes, or sometimes we call them as our objectives. In the new perspective that we're introducing, such as assessment for flexible learning, we're adding two important components to make the idea of learning coming out through the use of informed evidences about what students can do and cannot do. These two important ideas that we're adding in the concept of assessment for flexible learning is, number one, we need to make quality assessment accessible at various modes of instructional delivery. Making sure that assessment happens, making sure that assessment is an integral part of the teaching and the learning process across various flexible learning delivery modes is very important. And how this is actually conducted, even when it is done online or offline. The second is, we have to ensure that the teaching and the learning aspect of flexible learning will have to include assessment, and the assessment is delivered with that of quality. Meaning to say, there should be various stakeholders involved so that we can see results of assessment so that assessment becomes usable. Now, we have adopted our original two-dimensional framework on assessment for learning. And how do we now plug in practices on assessment for flexible learning across the four quadrants? Let me focus on the second quadrant and the fourth quadrant. In an online delivery mode with distant learning, it's very much feasible to have good assessment. You can do assessment before, during, and after instruction. You can even have a larger scope of assessment when you want to evaluate how effective the entire flexible learning program is in the institution by providing an assessment before the beginning of the school year and use this information to make some improvements towards the end of the school year.
I'm sorry,
online.
You have 1 more minute for your presentation.
1 more minute.
Yes.
Okay. Online delivery. Okay. And it can also be conducted in community-based. Okay. Let me now go through the succeeding slides. When you say aspects of quality implementation of assessment, it's very important that we have to realize that it is our obligation to, and it is our responsibility to ensure that flexible learning will work. Therefore, we need these particular standards to ensure that the quality delivery of flexible learning is actually provided. And we need to ensure that flexible learning will be effective based on our implementation. And in order to do that, we need to follow specific set of standards. And when I share these particular slides later on, you just click on this particular button so that you will be able to see the aspects of the standards. So generally, the standards is composed of 4. We have standards on how we develop the learning resources. It's very important on how the learning materials are actually designed so that it will make the learners engage in the learning, whether it's printed mode or online mode. Second is that it's very important for how effective these printed modules and these online modules are actually delivered, how this is facilitated by the parents and the teachers. It's very important also that we need to clarify what are the specific roles of the parents, the guardians, tutors, and the teacher when it comes into the delivery of flexible learning in various places where the learner is. And it's very important later on to look at data, information, to see whether we're actually delivering quality standard learning through monitoring and evaluation. Now, in the Philippine setting, these are some of the initiatives that are done on flexible learning delivery. For the private schools, these are some of the plans, and for the higher education institutions. Okay, here's just some of the snapshots that some of the initiatives that our organization did. We actually had a session with various administrators from both public and private schools, and we were able to reach about 51 schools, and we trained them on how to set up flexible learning delivery in their schools. And then we have implemented also the flexible learning delivery mode for implementing it for the guidance program. And we taught school administrators on how to come up with flexible learning delivery plans and then to disseminate it to their stakeholders, such as parents, so that parents will have a good grasp on how flexible learning is going to be delivered. And we have partnered with 2 schools. So we have trained the parents on how to teach reading instruction. And we have assisted PTAs in schools on how to actually collect summative assessment, because this is very much needed because this is graded. And lastly, I'd like to thank my team. Okay, they're my co-authors in developing the standards. And I'll just post later on the link on where you can actually derive the standards. I'd like to acknowledge my team, Ms. Nicole Factuar, Ms. Delma Robles, Ms. Paula Jean Bulilan, and Mr. Arvin J. Forto for the brainstorming on arriving with this set of standards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carlo, for the very insightful presentation, for sharing with us about the setting in the Philippines. I believe the material you shared has been very insightful for participants. Now, before we go to the next speaker, may I call Dr. Rene Colocar, the President of ALCO Philippines, to deliver the opening remarks. Please, sir.
All right, thank you to our moderator. First, my apology. I encountered some connectivity problem a while ago. So that's exactly the problems of different HCIs in the Philippines. In fact, connectivity problem. Nevertheless, for in behalf of the Association of Local Colleges and Universities in the Philippines, we would like to extend our heartfelt appreciation to SEAMEO, of course, through Dr. Ether Valenzuela and the SEAMEO technical staff for allowing ALCO to be part of this very significant undertakings, the joint webinar of both SEAMEO, ALCO, OWA, Philippines. Most government all over the world have temporarily closed academic institutions in an attempt to control and mitigate the spread of coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19 pandemic. Based on the latest data of the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, 144 countries have implemented localized schools closure, impacting the 1,186,127,211 learners, which is equivalent to around 67.7% of the total enrolled learners. Due to this severe disruption in education, teaching and learning process is now moving from traditional face-to-face to online class in an unprecedented measure and with a lot of trial and error in probability for the teachers and the learners. Moreover, these are also felt by many families around the world. Homeschooling challenges the parents or guardians' productivity as well as the children's learning and social life. These interferences in education might just seem a short-term issue, but we will look closely at the emerging situation. This might also have long-term consequences. With that, immediate responses shall be empirically planned and taken. School closure rushed the significant demand to institutionalize alternative modalities to guarantee the learning still continues amidst this pandemic. In the Philippines, flexible learning is seen as best option and is now being talked about among educational institutions through webinar sessions. Flexible learning is basically customizing an institution pace, place, and mode of learning. With PACE, for example, learners may engage in part-time learning to ensure the safety and to minimize their use of resources. Learning can take place in various settings, including the classroom or at home through the internet connection. While mode refers to the way the content is delivered using technology, typically through blended learning, fully online classes, or technologically enhanced experiences. In light of this, the Association of Local Colleges and Universities of the Philippines and the Association of Local Colleges and Universities Commission on Accreditation, together with the general membership, recommended to the Board of Regents or Board of Trustees of Local colleges and universities through a joint advisory, the implementation of seamless blended digital learning program during the second semester and summer of academic year 2019 and 20. This is in line with advisories issued by the Commission on Higher Education, providing guidelines for the prevention of the spread of COVID-19 in higher education institutions. The advisory highlights some organizational intervention, such as the conduct of free webinars and other virtual learning activities for LCU top officials, college dean, faculty, and staff. And just this June, Alcohol launched the search for the most agile and resilient LCU, where all LCUs are encouraged to submit a comprehensive transition plan, including the SBD learning program to be implemented. As local colleges and universities are now intensively preparing for the upcoming academic year, this joint webinar of SEAMEO and ALCO COA is a great avenue for the speakers and participants to share ideas and experiences on the development of flexible and technologically mediated learning program for the local colleges and universities. With the available technology and ICT infrastructure challenges, institutionalizing such program is really a significant matter to deal with. Let us also expect that the emergence of the new hybrid education system will result to new outcomes that LCUs must be ready of. Considering the utilization of online teaching and learning, there is possibility that flexible learning might be further accelerated and that technology-mediated learning might eventually become an integral part of Philippine education. With the unclear future that this pandemic might bring, by working together, we can come up with effective learning programs that will enable our students to receive the quality education they deserve and the assurance of safety during this crisis. Thank you, and let us claim the success of this joint initiative of SEAMEO, ALCO, and ALCO COA. Good day or good evening to everyone. God bless us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rene Kolokar, for your wonderful remarks. We are now moving on to our second speaker. She is Professor Dr. Paulina Panen from Indonesia. She is an expert in higher education, e-learning, distance education, educational technology, and curriculum development. She has over 30 years of experience in national and international education, the chairman of several task forces on higher education quality development, including the development of Indonesian MOOCs. She was actually my previous boss in SEAMEO Simolek. Hello, Ibu, good luck for today's presentation. Now may I hand over the session to you, please. Ibu, can you turn on your sound, your audio?
Okay. No? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly now.
Okay, I can share my content now. Is it okay?
Yes, we can see it clearly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, and good morning to all of you. I'm delighted that I'm invited by Dr. Ethel and SEAMEO family to be one of the panelists today. It has been a long time for me to be with all of you. Some of you may have known me for, I don't know, more than a decade. It's a nice reunion in the morning. However, very fruitful reunion. I think the introduction, welcome remarks from Dr. Rene Kolokar has been enlightening us all and saying that actually the challenge is not only particular to Philippines, it's also to every one of us in the ASEAN countries and perhaps in the global world also. However, Indonesia, I think, feels almost similar to what Philippines is experiencing right now. And we have taken also some measures to answer to the challenge. Okay, we are going to talk about the flexible and technology-mediated learning program. And may I start with explanation about Indonesian policy. Just prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, actually, we have already a new policy that is providing freedom for learning at school level as well as higher education. And we define the teachers at school level as change agent, and then the campus in higher education as freedom campus. So actually, we were already moving toward what we call flexible learning just prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we took advantage at that time with the technology development based on the industrial revolution, like robotic, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, to be implemented in schools as well as campuses. However, we were shocked, great shock by the COVID-19 pandemic. And actually, it was a blessing because the COVID-19 pandemic pushed forward the policy both at the school level and higher education level into practices. And at the extreme level, the practice is not in campus, it's not at the school, but at home for every student. We also face another challenge from the learning process theory. Especially Michael Fullan has been very prolific during the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm using his Mobius ribbon to explain or to illustrate how actually in our children's right now, the millennials, we call it, to learn, play, and research, produce, or do or work all together at the same time. They don't differentiate learning by itself, playing by itself, or doing things differently. They put everything together. They learn while they play and while they are doing something. So everything is just put together without any limitation of stopping point. There is no stopping point. They learn, they play, they research, and they produce or do something, and they learn, they play, they do something again. Something like that. So every time their learning process is just totally different from us who are experiencing a very sequential process, learning first, playing at home, and then do something later on when you're doing homework or something like that. So it's totally different picture of learning process now with our millennials. And based on that, actually the new learning process is already moving forward, introducing the individual learning, online learning, small group learning, and collaborative learning, like the one that I put in a picture, and based on the use of technology. However, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the teacher-led small group instruction was cut off. So the most modality being used during the COVID-19 pandemic is online learning, personalized online learning, and also individual learning, and collaborative learning being online as well as small or what we call very limited meetings. 2 or 3 children together within the same proximity or areas. But the teacher-led small group instruction is all gone. However, the use of technology is very increasing. After the COVID-19 pandemic, we are witnessing a new development of learning actually. I put the 7 principles here. And the seventh one is the one developed after the COVID-19 pandemic. What we call it is less contact, not contract, less contact learning. So it is not no contact, but it is lesser contact learning. Yeah, the contact is reduced somehow to maintain the safety protocol. So based on that, actually the most the most popular new learning process has been what we call the flip learning. We are flipping the traditional procedures of teaching and learning at school, something like this, into something like this. So the teacher or the lecturer will produce material so that the students will view it at home. And then if they go to the classroom activities, they will discuss the material. So no more lecturing, no more teaching, one-way teaching from the teachers. And then the principles are higher level of learning, out of class activities, instructor facilitates students, activities focused learning. Learning is collaborative and connects with instructor, the students, and the use of technology. However, the classroom activities was replaced during the COVID-19 with learning from home. Everything can be done from home. And this kind of habit actually will be the new habit, what we call the new learning in the new normal situation. That is one extreme. The other extreme is the project-based learning. Flip learning is more of teachers-driven, still teacher-driven, but the project-based learning is more the students-driven. So if the teacher provide learning guide, students workbook, practice and practicum guide, and then the students can do their own project, inquiry-based, fun, active interaction, and collaborative. They can do active learning. They can later on, after they do the learning and the project, they can exhibit and present their result. And to indicate mastery, the teacher will assess based on the peer assessment and also based on the teacher assessment. And then they will provide feedback. So the project-based learning is on the other hand, on the other side of the flip learning, which is flip learning is teacher-driven. The project-based learning is more student-driven. And if you see the use of technology, actually flip learning is more of technology-based, but project-based learning is reducing the use of technology somehow, because they don't need to be present at video conference all the time. They can have the time of their own to do the project based on the learning guidance or the student workbook. So the minimal use of technology you can find in project-based learning. This is very useful, especially answering to Dr. Carlos' issues just now, saying that not all the students have access to technology, the quadrant 4 situation. As much as we want to use the technology, we use robot, we use VR, etc., and then we use video conferencing like this, but it is not the technology actually that matters. It is not what or how many technology you use, but how you use it. Because what matters to us educators is learning. Whether or not if you are using flipped classroom, learning taking place. Whether or not if you are using project-based learning, learning is taking place. And then how you use the technology is to equip you, to assist you as educators, to provide cognitive presence to the students, to provide social presence to the students. They are being touched, they are being connected to you, and also to provide learning presence within the classroom. But the students, of course, like Dr. Rene said, that the student can just study anytime, anywhere, and with anybody collaborating. So once again, it is the learning that matters, not the technology. And with that, I come to 9 points of remark. This technology-based, especially pushed forward by the COVID-19 pandemic, is actually opening up learning, become unbundled, become multi-mode, become multi-channel. So there is no more what they call stigmatization of school. School is the only one source. No, it is accessible. It is more flexible to anyone. And then also we noticed that only good pedagogy, which will work, the teacher will have to use good pedagogy in guaranteeing, in making sure that the learning is taking place wherever the students is. Sometimes the teacher will have to do door-to-door what they call visit to the students if they don't have access to computer or internet, but still they have to make sure, the teacher have to make sure that the learning taking place. And then the other thing is that while we are doing flip learning or project-based learning, actually we educators notice that we cannot walk alone, we cannot work alone. We need somebody to assist us. So that it can be, developing the course, developing the program can be a collaborative effort actually among teachers with also technical expertise in IT, for example. So we will have to work in a team also. And then the other thing is that we are no longer tune on the approach of one-way teaching, teacher to the students, and then content delivery, whether the curriculum is completed or not, and then summative assessment, but more of constructivist pedagogical approaches, especially when you are using the project-based learning. That is more constructivist, where the students can construct their own project, doing the project, and then later on construct their knowledge. And then number 5 is that acceleration towards blended and online learning, whether you like it or not. Now it is more than ever blended and online learning everywhere. And then the face-to-face teaching is very reduced into minimal. And then the other thing is that if you have students, whether you like it or not, at the Q4, according to Dr. Carlo, who doesn't have access to internet or computer, then you have to have what I call a differentiated strategy. And that requires a very good pedagogy and instructional design on the hands of the teacher. And then we see right now that since the meeting is not in the classroom where the teacher is the authority of the classroom, there is an increased sharing power of students and teachers, especially with the guidelines provided by the teacher. The students can do their project on their own pace, on their own time, with their own strategy. And this leads to autonomous learning. And then there is also commitment of equity and access across of our institution, especially the government, I believe. That is what Dr. Rene just now mentioning to us. And then also increased acceptance that the role of institution and educators as a source of care, not a source of information anymore. So everything we preach prior to the COVID-19, it's happening in the COVID-19 pandemic, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it will continue as the new normal for all of us in education sector, and especially in Indonesia, I would say, and also I believe in many other countries in ASEAN. With that, thank you very much. I hope this will be a good discussion follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Paulina. It was a wonderful sharing from you. Before we move on to the next speaker, we have two questions for the first two speakers, Dr. Carlo and Professor Paulina. Operator, please, if you may display the two questions for our first two speakers. So this one is for Dr. Carlo. Can you give us details on how to administer assessment to children in different levels, especially in elementary grades?
Okay.
From Sharon, Pascual, and other participants, please.
Okay, so it's actually going to be a little bit challenging, and many stakeholders are involved when you actually conduct assessment especially for the lower grades. Now, for the lower grades, it will actually depend on whether assessment is done as formative or summative. For formative assessment, there's actually a little degree of control, but when we conduct summative assessment, there's actually a higher degree of control for the lower levels. Now, if it's going to be an online formative assessment, usually it's integrated already in the learning management system where feedback and answer keys are provided. And when the formative assessment is a performance-based task, the students can actually record their performance when it is a procedure, and it can actually be viewed by the teacher online, or when they actually record the process, they can actually upload that process and the teacher will have a good opportunity for feedback. However, if it's going to be an offline through a print module, formative assessment will have a corresponding answer key coming from the parent or from the tutor, where after the learner is able to accomplish this particular task, a tutor or a parent or an adult who's facilitating the learning of the child will actually have to do the checking and provide some feedback and process the mistakes so that another chance is actually provided for the child. When we're doing now the summative assessment online, same procedure is actually done. However, a much degree of control is actually needed because summative assessments are now graded. One way is to have a video monitoring if it's done online, where the teacher can actually see what is going on while the learner is actually accomplishing the summative assessment online task. It's now going to be challenging if the learner does not have any internet access. When doing summative assessments at home, okay, so usually these summative assessment tasks are printed and the child accomplishes the summative assessment form. Very clear guidelines need to be set with the parent or the adult who's actually supervising the learning of the child on what they should do in order to monitor the child while the child is actually accomplishing the summative assessment task, like ensuring that the child is not provided with the answer, not opening references when they're actually accomplishing tasks. This can actually be solved by providing open-ended questions rather than questions that are close-ended with responses, so that you can see uniqueness of the answer of every child. When a product is produced in a performance task, these products can actually be sent to the teacher. Drop boxes are provided on specific zonal locations where the students can actually submit their work there, and it's collected by the teacher. And feedback is sent to the child through a printed note on how they can actually improve their work. Generally, this can actually be solved by a school where they need to provide a specific set of guidelines on what the parents should do every time formative and summative assessments are actually done. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Carlo, for the answer to our first question. It was brief but comprehensive. So now we are moving on to the next question. This one is for Professor Paulina. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the flexible learning course? The question from Ms. Adora Kurvas.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you for the question, Adora. I think that is a very good questions and very spot on. In my opinion, the strength of flexible learning is because it gives freedom actually for everyone, for the students as well as also for the teachers, and sometimes also for the parents. Okay. However, we notice the strength, the weaknesses. That is, as you know, with freedom usually comes responsibility. Now, it is not easy for us, the educators, to push on students being responsible. Like, for example, if you are supposed to be meeting via video conference at 8 in the morning, sometimes the students are not there, not all of them. Suppose you are you have to do the homework, but on your own. And what they do is just calling all the teachers and the friends every time. This happened based on the research in Indonesia, and later on they found out that being free at home, studying at home, is not nice. They miss the teachers, they miss also the friends. So yes, there is for me, for example, an independent person like me, I love flexible learning very much so that I can manage my own time, etc. However, for students, actually, they need more than what we call more than being left alone. So that's why the what we call the guidance actually from teacher is very much needed. So that's my answer, and especially if you want to take more control from teachers, because in flexible learning the control from teachers is very much less. Actually, you can use what the children like right now is game. Using game in learning, if you can ask teachers to do gaming, that can what they call that can teach the students with a lot of responsibility, because game and artificial intelligence can be embedded with our kind of disciplines and all the requests that we would like to have controlling the students actually. But to know that the students can do it on their own, can do it with responsibility, and they can do it anywhere, but still you have to have your telephone on because they will call you anytime. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Paulina, for your answer to our second question. Yeah, it was very enlightening. So before I hand the session to our next speakers, to all participants, I'd like to encourage you to share today's webinar with your social networks, so you can take a screenshot of this webinar session and share it or post them directly on your Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook accounts. So we can make this webinar become even bigger and wider, in our next sessions. So currently we have more than 35,000 viewers, if I'm not mistaken, in SEAMEO Secretariat YouTube accounts. Very impressive. So now, may I introduce you to our third speaker from the Philippines, Dr. Edison Fermin. He is the Vice President for Academic Affairs of the National Teachers College in Manila, Philippines. Prior to this, his extensive work covered curriculum, instruction, and leadership in basic education. So, Dr. Edison Fermin, without further ado, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Aline, and thank you so much for having me here today. I hope that everyone can see my screen now. And what I hope to do is to clarify my points within the next 8 or 10 minutes. I came from the National Teachers College, built on 9 decades of building the nation, education, and it took us only 9 days to transition to flexible learning. The rapidness of all these changes is impacting upon the kind of changes that we want to facilitate in most of our educational institutions, and the cases that have been shared so far articulate that it's not an easy journey. In the hopes of finding ways by which institutions may be helped out, we were in search for definitions to begin with. And currently, at the Commission on Higher Education, we are adopting a definition that allows several voices in flexible learning and education to be heard. And what we have right now is a definition you're seeing on the screen. Flexible learning is the design and delivery of entire degree programs, specific courses within degree programs, or interventions that are suitable to specific learners. But we need to be mindful of learners' needs in terms of pace, place, process, and products, covering only the most essential experiences, content, and outcomes, and of course, being mindful equally of the role of learner control and customizability. So allow me to describe to you what we have done at the institutional and probably what most institutions in the Philippines have been doing over the past few weeks. Of course, there's still that great need to pay attention to the kind of learning outcomes that are rooted in institutional priorities. But I say that more importantly, we should now be connecting with the industries that are largely affected by the pandemic. We need to be mindful of how those requirements are going to change because they are supposed to also feed into our learning outcomes ecosystem. Only after that can we make decisions on the pace, place, process, and products of learning. Take note that these four considerations will need to be understood carefully by institutions in their attempt to look for viable solutions. If we look at pace, you could either look at the teacher leading both synchronous or asynchronous experiences, or we really put more emphasis on the learners taking charge, where you have two dimensions of self-paced learning. One is fully independent, and the other one is guided in some form. In terms of place, of course, we can think about residential types of learning if and when quarantine measures have been reconfigured. And that would mean that it's a toss between the classroom or specific sites of training and education. Or we can do a distance or remote, and there are two ways of looking at these options. Either you look at wired options or non-wired options. In between, you can think about blended learning modalities, and that is okay, but of course, that will be contingent on many considerations. In terms of processes, I'm looking at least the modular set of processes where you get to prepare real printed materials that students can interact with, or if not, their digital version. Or you can do also simulative learning, particularly for courses that demand a lot of laboratory-based learning experiences. And that is why under simulative flexible learning, there could still be lab or job-based learning or remote simulations using artificial intelligence and simulation software available online. But if you ask me, simulative learning can also still happen by or through the provision of do-it-yourself learning kits that may be sent like modules to students. And by products, while Dr. Magno and our earlier speaker from Indonesia have mentioned about the use of formative and summative assessments, which can be done via manual or automated means, I would say that we must also think about non-traditional assessments, which look at actual performance-based assessments documented by students in one way or another, or you could take a look at some forms of reflective assessments, which I'm going to deal with in a little while. In the search of some way for you to remember my inputs today coming from my personal, professional, and institutional experience, I have thought about the word SEAMEO. And I hope that the SEAMEO Secretariat will be able to approve this acronym of some sort. I have 6 things that I would want to share with the rest of the people in this call to make flexible learning happen. And I will discuss each of them in a little while. Let's begin with student-centeredness. Each institution will have to be mindful of at least 3 categories of learning, of learners rather, who are at work at the moment. So they are categories 1 to 3, talking about the extent to which each learner is connected in some form to the school or a learning platform or any delivery provider for the continuity of education. We need to be mindful of this because equitable access is an important issue. And by equitable access, each institution will have to carefully choose from a variety of both wired and non-wired options. In the literature of flexible learning and education systems, you will find that there are at least 10 known wired options to facilitate flexible learning, and about 7 for non-wired options. If you look at the non-wired options, some of these have been in existence prior to COVID-19. It's just that we need to be mindful how they can be adjusted relative to the conditions that we are facing right now. I'd like to pay attention to project-based learning, deliver on-demand learning kits, and course supermarkets among the non-wired options, because these three currently are being explored by a lot of countries now migrating towards a lesser form or a more enabling form of quarantine measures in which students can really choose what to learn at a given time without necessarily having to follow a very rigid and structured curriculum. To me, this is the future that flexible learning is going to open, when students can really decide for themselves where they will begin, what kind of content and experience they will have to go through on their own or under the guidance of certain adults or significant others. But the rest are known options already available to all of us. But where would institutions, educators, families, and communities base much of their decision on? I would say in the reconfiguration of teaching and learning processes, it must be emphasized that we cannot operate on the same set of learning outcomes prior to COVID-19. I'd say that we concentrate only on outcomes that are easy to monitor and measure, and therefore are quite realistic for both teachers and learners to manage, even in remote conditions. Of course, we think that there's still a need for them to acquire or access content, but I would say that more than content, we need to design appropriate and developmentally appropriate and meaningful remote learning experiences that allow for students to see themselves as owners of the learning process. And those experiences are necessarily anchored on content, but the way I define content must be content that is an inch long but a mile deep. So that means to say that we only concentrate on what needs to be known at the moment, because we cannot assume that all learners have access to resources at home or wherever they are right now. While online learners will have access to a myriad of choices for content, we must be mindful that the greater majority will still have access to little amount of content. And if we keep that in mind, equitable access is guaranteed. Also, I'd like us to think that when we are transitioning to the new normal right now, before we were talking about the mix of knowledge, skills, and attitudes constituting a learning outcome. That's insofar as our Ministry of Higher Education is concerned in the Philippines. But if we talk about anything and everything connected to the pandemic from the lens of our disciplines, subjects, or courses at the moment, I think we will make the most of the pandemic to teach 3 important R's. And yes, they are not your reading, writing, and arithmetic, but the three R's of the 21st century, namely reasoning, resilience, and responsibility. I am very positive that if we bring into the learning experiences of the students the kind of news, the kind of changes that they are dealing with relative to the pandemic, we can enrich and expand the horizon of their appreciation of remote learning, because this is the time when we need to talk about adversity as an opportunity for learning. And take note, each of these 3 new R's can be driven by our transversal skills of creativity, critical thinking, and connected or collaboration. I would like us to engage more students in reflective assessments. I am for measuring learning outcomes, but at the moment, we need to address as well the limitations of traditional formative and summative assessments and all the considerations of people working with children, especially on the integrity of assessment processes. If you look at the screen right now, I am showing you an alternative assessment we created for one of our degree programs in Information and Communications Technology. This already serves as the terminal assessment of the students who are wanting to become future computer scientists and ICT specialists. If you notice, The context is the COVID-19 crisis. The content that they have to access would be the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that constitute ICT as a discipline, but the direction is to solve an issue, exercise reasoning, resilience, and responsibility in order that they can make use of their discipline as a way of addressing this current adversity and future adversities. This is what I mean by engaging them in reflective learning assessments and experiences. It's also going to be useful if institutions of learning, whether you are in the primary, secondary, or tertiary education, or even graduate education, to think about what kind of communication lines will have to be open to students, parents, teachers, community members, even the janitors and the other staff members of the institution. In my case, our case, at the National Teachers College, we began to introduce during March the enhanced student academic engagement arrangement. Our focus was to open lines for the continuity of academic engagement. But we realized immediately after that, that cannot be the case. We need to open communication lines with other offices that provide student services. That's why we transitioned to adaptive community for the continuity of education and student services. In summary, I would like to propose that for everyone in this call, the direction towards flexible learning as far as our institutions are concerned should be that we consider student-centeredness as key and equitable access as a guiding principle, and where our adjustments must focus only on what is essential for the time being, so that we can also look at the pandemic as the content and context of instruction, where reflective assessments are going to be useful in order that our students can make better sense of their rapidly changing environment. But they can only do this if they have guarantee that they can communicate with as many providers of service and nurturance possible. I'd like to end by saying that right from the very beginning, SEAMEO has figured out the formula for education both in normal times and in adversity. The SEAMEO song tells us it's time to open our eyes to a bright and promising future. We'll rise to the call of the times and create a stronger tomorrow. Mabuhay, maraming salamat, and may the spirit of collaboration guide all the member countries of SEAMEO. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Addison, for your wonderful presentation. It was very enlightening. Just a little info before we go to our next speaker. If you have any questions or comments to a specific speaker or to all of the speakers, please type them into the comment box in YouTube. The committee will try to screen some good questions, and I will bring them up during the question and answer sessions. So now I am pleased to invite our next speakers from Thailand, Associate Professor Kamalrat Intaratat. She is currently being chair and founder of the International Online Program for ASEAN Communication under the Faculty of Communication of STOU, Sukotai Thammathirat Open University in Thailand. And her focus is the development communication, especially the community-based communication. So now, without further ado, may I hand over the session to you now.
Swadika. Yes, Swadi from Bangkok, Thailand. We are very honored to join this SEAMEO forum, and especially the fantastic topic of flexible learning that is embedded by technology. So on behalf of our STOU, Sukotai Thammathirat Open University, actually we have done a lot of flexible learning to serve all the group of people in Thailand and also in the region of ASEAN. So let's see that how could we do that. In case of our design of flexible learning, we normally design the flexible learning that serve the fundamental demand of our people. So once we decide the education, we have to make sure that all the basic demand of their life can be fulfilled by our education. So first, we have designed the education that can serve their living. They can earn a job, they can earn a living, and then they can access to information that is important to their life, and then finally they can be somebody that stand by their own if they can get that education. So this is how that we design flexible learning in our university, kind of. So let's share you with some of the example that we have designed our flexible learning that you mentioned at the earlier that how can we use technology to embed it or to facilitate any kinds of education from the high end to the low end, from the high end technology from the high zone to low zone, kind of that. So let me start by the example of our university working with the national platform of Thailand that we call Thai MOOC. MOOC is the national single knowledge platform that is authorized by the Thai government to use technology to deliver any kinds of education to all the Thai people, but mostly it's more on in the university base. So this is the one that we work with them. Our university is a partner of this national knowledge platform also, but in the sake of more on lifelong education, alternative education, kind of that. And then once the Thai MOOC is more on university based, so the platform is a little bit difficult to access to our out school people, to some of the marginalized people. So our university by the Expertise Research Center has designed more simplified platform. So this called we transform from the Thai MOOC to be the Smart MOOC. So this one is a moderate educational platform to simplify the accessibility and affordability to all the group of people in Thailand to access to education for their earn a living, for their welfare, for their dignity, kinds of that. So even though they are the small farmer, they are the ethnic group, or they are the monk, or any kinds of that, they can educate, they can access to education with the MOOC base, meaning that open and embedded by technology. So you see that. So still some of our group, they still cannot very difficult to access to the education. So the Expertise Research Center that I'm the director of that, our duty is how can we make all the more simplified accessibility and affordability to all our people. So we decide this Thai MOOC that's called Thai Yung. Yung means the trunk of, or the hub of knowledge, or the hub of food, kind of that. That is the local dialect of the Thai. So we decide this kind of the most simple educational platform for our people. So meaning that even though they are taxi driver, they are the small farmer, they are anyone in Thailand, they can access to our flexible education that we provide for them, kind of that. This is example that we use our online education or flexible education to serve the ethnic group in the north of Thailand. So they work, they learn, and then they can taking care of their family at the same time, and then they can earn a living, and then they can access to any kinds of relevant information for their life. So this is an example of what we are doing, flexible learning. And by this year, since last year, we have do a lot of technology embedded into the education. Yes, we are Buddhism country, so meaning that we have a big number of monks. That is a big population that need education, especially the Bali, Sanskrit, kind of that. That is the language of Buddhism. So our university has served the education for this religious group by doing the MOOC, and then train them, and then flexible them and simplify them into the mobile devices especially the smartphone to all of them. So we work as a partner to our group of people. So by this year, the monk can be access to mobile education to study the religious language by about 50,000 at the minimum. Have that. And then along the way, we also by this year, our government announced to be the national agenda, national flagship of the aging society. So meaning that Thailand has announced the flagship, national flagship of the aging society together with the UN decades of healthy aging. So meaning that our university has a duty to embed technology into the physical training of the caregiver in Thailand. So this is an ongoing project that how can we use technology to magnifying to scaling up this kind of fundamental knowledge to taking care of themselves as the aging person and taking care of the community with the certified practices. So this is what our university is planning now with a lot of partners collaboration. And then by the most down south of Thailand, we like in Mindanao, we have a lot of special group that is the problem of the accessibility kind of that. So our university, our research center have trained them to use simplified technology to access them to all kinds of first education, certified education, second earn a living and security kinds of that. So this is how we educate them with the technology embedded. And then another special group that we use is kind of the handicapped groups and also kinds of the prisoner, that is the one that stay behind the wall or stay behind the bar. So we educate them by using the technology to facilitate their education. We use offline server to educate the prisoner in jail to make it possible. Once they get free from the jail, from the prison, they can have enough education to confront with the real world. So this is the education that our university has support to the people in our group of that. So I would like to say that by the technology, by what the previous speaker has shared, that our Sukhothai Thammathirat Open University, we try to look around and then try to use technology at the best we can because we are the only university of ODL in Thailand. So our duty is how can we use technology to convey education, meaningful education to our people. So this is the how. So I would like to say thanks and honor for SEAMEO and you all to have a chance to join with you. And then we do hope that with the support from our family of SEAMEO, our program of 100% online of communication for ASEAN would be got support for you all. It is very new normal academy that fit with the with the flexible learning. Thank you so much. ขอบคุณมากค่ะ
ขอบคุณค่ะ Professor Kamarat for your interesting presentation. So we move on to the next speaker from Vietnam, Dr. Din Tuan Long. May I introduce him to you all? He is the Director of Technology and Learning Material Center of Hanoi Open University, Vietnam. His experience includes information technology, instructional design, multimedia, and e-learning. And he is also the person in charge of e-learning infrastructure and e-learning development at Hanoi Open University. Please, sir, you may have the floor now. The audio still off. Dr. Dins, you're on now. Okay.
Okay, let me check.
Okay, I can hear you now.
You can hear me?
Yes. Okay, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Excellency, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm very honored to be here to participate in an international conference organized in a very special way like this to make a small contribution to supporting online educational. Can you see my slide? Everything is okay?
Yes, everything's okay, please.
Okay, and in my very short presentation, I would like to share some of our experience and start a discussion in order to find out the reason for some unsuccessful online learning of school and university through the COVID-19 pandemic. We have just started online learning recently in the effort of helping students not to go to school, but not to stop learning. Firstly, we all know that COVID-19 is a medical crisis, and it led to a lot of influence on everyday activity. Most countries now have implemented social isolation to reduce infection in the community. Non-essential product factories close, reduce public transportation, school close, and I think we can see this kind of image everywhere. Most of Vietnam school had closed for a long time. And also to mention education, the implementation of e-learning becomes the only one option. In current period, e-learning is not a new issue and had been mentioned by many scholars, being deployed in many places. However, perhaps people think it's simple, and this is the most basic reason of all problems arising now. Let's take a look at the school. We all know that all schools closed. So most of the country try to provide several kind of e-learning to keep on education in the country. And in Vietnam, we provide lessons through television, and some kind of students are using Zoom or Teams or Meet, Google Meet, and they are teaching something like we are doing now. It's making an online conference. And firstly, all of them think it's very simple, and they try to think that it will be very successful. But to improve communication between teacher and student, a lot of teachers try using social network like Facebook, WhatsApp, Viber, Zalo, and ready to answer all the questions of students. They think we think that it's not enough, because firstly, after several weeks doing online learning, the first time everything seemed okay. They think they can do e-learning easily and successfully, but after some time pass, there are many issues appear. We easily find out a lot of complaints about online learning in the newspaper everywhere. I'm not sure in your country, but in Vietnam, we get this kind of issue. For example, this is difficult to manage the online classroom, especially when it expands the number of students. Teachers have to know what do the students do. Are they learning or doing something else? Most of the time, teaching becomes transfer knowledge one way and have to manage the quality control. Teachers who using social network find out that they need to work harder than ever. They need to check message every time. And after a long time, not only the teacher, also the student is very hard to find. What does they communicate with teacher because of massive message in their phone? When the students study by themselves at home, there are so many things can happen and disruption their lesson. If they haven't got their own quiet place, anything happen can interrupt the learning process. And there is a chance that many people do not understand about the online learning, including teacher and student. all of us are here, come from the open university, so we understand about the e-learning and we know how to organize e-learning. But when we do it for the public and when most of the school apply e-learning, it will be the problem. For K-12, for example, for K-12, especially the elementary school, not only students but parents need to join the learning process. Help students to join class, read and send messages to teacher. It spend time, and not all of the parent can do it well for a long time. There are many complaints from parents because they are too tired to helping students. Another issue is very difficult to assess the quality of learning online because the technical issue. For example, we cannot authorize the learner or not easy to control student computer while they are doing something online test. We in HOU, we do some kind of after students finish their learning, and we make some examination for final, and we are using when we need to use online, we apply the oral test, and we also using Google Meet and doing some oral test, but not all subject we can do something like that and prove the students are appear in they are doing their test or are not doing. And lastly is whenever we apply massive online learning, there will be security and safety issue appear. For example, in Vietnam, and sometimes we talking about they warning about using Zoom, and whenever we using it or in Vietnam, there also some group in Facebook where students can share their Zoom meeting code and password and invite strangers join their online classroom. A teacher not skilled enough cannot solve that situation, and sometimes it's interruption the class their lesson. And the reason, what is about the reason? Most of us are here all agree that the online learning, distance learning is very good and is the future method of learning. But why there are so many difficulties like that appear? In our research, we point out some reasons. Firstly, is experience. Most of the school and university who have just deployed online learning in the time of COVID-19 have no experience in online learning. They just have some simple knowledge and got shock introduction from technology company. And we all know that technology company, they don't know what school needs and what happened in school. So that can lead to many wrong action while implement online learning. The second, teacher haven't got appropriate pedagogy for online teaching. We know that e-learning can replace most action in traditional lesson, but we need to change to make it suitable. Most of the school and university using synchronous e-learning and have no suitable learning material. And one other reason is most of the school and university we have just started online learning because it's for very short time, only about 1 or 2 weeks for preparation. So they haven't got their own learning management system. They are only using free service like Google Classroom, Teams, and mostly have nothing. Besides the school, the government also have no special regulation on online learning. For example, in Vietnam, Ministry of Education and Training recognize that and still in the process of making new regulation about the online learning. How to teaching, how to learning, how to assess learning process, how to do the examination, how to recognize student learning results. That's very important, and all schools can base on that to build their regulation. And maybe last reason is students don't understand correctly about the method. Most of them are familiar with the passive learning method, like initiative, and don't know how to learn by themselves. And when they join the online classroom, they only join the synchronous e-learning and haven't got the asynchronous e-learning. It means that there are no material and only synchronous, only meeting the teacher through some kind of conference. So how is the solution? We think that based our experience, we suggest several solutions for that issue. It's raise awareness about online learning method and deployment model for school leader, learner, teacher, and student. All the university and school need to investment for dedicated LMS system, and they need to connect, expand to quickly build a warehouse of shared material and document. We can connect school and university to quickly have that kind of shared material. Because we need to say that because in Vietnam we haven't got that kind of OER system, and we recommend to propose the government to have national regulation and standard for online training, training and guide for teacher and student on how to teach and learn online. We need to promote the information about the meaning, method, way of online learning to familiar and society. And this is very important because if we cannot explain the online e-learning and e-learning to social in the near future, sometimes they will think that the e-learning is not very good and not effective. And in my conclusion, we have several conclusions, is that COVID-19 is what a pandemic causing a lot of influence on educational and training, but also it's an opportunity for online training. Even there are still some issue, but after school and universities they implement their e-learning, there are several people from that still think that e-learning will be the future learning method for education. The second is that if we implement correctly and methodically, it will be a big step of education and training. The involvement of education policy maker and the change is in awareness of school leader is needed. School need proper investment and connectivity to share resources to others to make it the really future learning method. And this is all of my presentation, and thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Din Tuan Long, for your presentation. It was a very good sharing. So now we are with our last speakers, Dr. Eun Young Kim. She is a research fellow in Korean Educational Development Institute, or KEDI. She has been involved in various higher and international education projects at both national and international levels, and she holds a directorial position of Office of Public Relations and International Affairs of KEDI. So without further ado, the floor is yours, ma'am.
My name is Eun Young Kim. Thank you let me change my slides into the slideshow. Can you see my slides now?
Not yet.
Oh, let me try one more time.
I can see clearly now. Dr. Kim, can you say something?
Okay.
We want to check your
So
sound.
you cannot really see my slides, but I will try to give you my presentation then. Okay.
Well, we can see your slides now.
You can see my slides now?
Yes, I can.
Right. Okay, good. Today I wanted to share 2 points, Korea's education responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, focusing on online classes, and the role of teacher in training and then emerging issues. Some of the issues has been already discussed and delivered. Next slide, please. Could you move to our next slides? This was strange. Okay. So some of the issues already delivered and discussed by other presenters who presented earlier. Korea already started online classes for all students from first grader to the 12th grader since May. In order to have that kind of implementation, we had to prepare certain features in terms of hardware. So in order to provide the online classes, there were two purposes to provide online classes. One is to ensure the health and safety of the students because of the pandemic. We maintained our social distance policy. And then to protect students' right to education access. Like all other countries, Korea is also have a very high enthusiasm regarding education. That's why the demand from schools, parents were very high to continue maintain the education. But in order to provide online education or online classes, some infrastructure has to be established because the one that we had was not sufficient to maintain stable education quality. So one was the expansion of public infrastructure. So we have e-learning site, but they had to increase the seven-folded of expansion of e-learning site. And then online class materials has been increased for 300-folded. So think about how much work has been done by the government and the teachers and other people. And the new EBS TV channels newly created. So before we had 7 education broadcasting system TV channels, but in order to provide education, online education, they increased the number of channels from 7 to 12 for elementary and secondary education school students, and provide free online learning resources. So in order to do that, they temporarily relaxed a bit copyright application for education purpose. I'm going to talk about this later. Could you move to next slide, please? Okay, so these are the types of online classes, but as other presenters put it different way, but there are 2 types, real-time interactive classes and one-way classes. So real-time interactive classes are allow immediate exchange of feedback with the students, including real-time communication by using video conferencing on online platforms like this. And one-way classes are content-oriented and task-oriented. One is lecture. So students watch video recorded lecture content and then learn content through the video learning. And teachers monitor students' learning and provide feedbacks. And lecture plus activity. Students watch the video recorded learning content and engage in discussion by leaving comments on asking and answering questions with their peers. So these are the combined ones. And task-oriented type is teachers monitor how much progress students have made to meet achievement standards of each subject through self-directed learning and give tasks and feedback. Students. And teachers have said that about 40% of the teachers are use real-time interactive classes, and most of the teachers said that they combine the content-oriented and task-oriented types of online classes. And as a policy researcher, I wanted to give you information on classes operate within Korean education system. If you see the slides, the schools, they plan for online classes and grades and subject. Weekly plan for online classes. So teachers by the subject or sometimes within the grades, they get together and they discuss about how they are going to provide weekly online classes weekly basis. So they have a weekly plan. and they operate the online classes daily, and give feedback, evaluation, and record keeping. What we do is we relaxed a bit of a social distance, so schools open now, but because we haven't completely get over the COVID-19 yet, students phase out going to school. For example, my daughter, who is in seventh grade now, she goes to school for 1 week, and for other graders like 8 and 9 grader students stay home. So she goes to school for 1 week, and then for next 2 weeks she stay home, but she takes the classes from online based on the scheduled plan. And teacher-student interactions can take place in here. But if you see this systematic approaches, a lot of works are involved for teachers, right? So can you go to next slide, please? Okay, so role of teachers under COVID-19. They develop learning contents, teach classes, guide and help students to adapt new learning environments. They carry out administrative works. So they have to, because they cannot really see the students face to face. A lot of information has to be gathered, because sometimes individual students, all the students has to report their conditions every morning. So then teachers carried out all the teachers has to promote or call students if they fail to report their health conditions. And sometimes, because of a lot of things are done online, they have more work to communicate with parents. And because this is a new situation, we have to gather a lot of data, information on schools. And teachers are the main initial data collector from students or homes and schools. So they have a lot of work, administrative works. And although ICT is not a new environment, we think that we are quite familiar with the ICT environment, but learning environment is quite different, because we are very accustomed to the traditional learning environment that takes place in school, in classroom, face to face. So in order to guide students, they have to help students to open the website and how to access to certain features of online classes. And that can be done by teachers. And link education offices and school districts, schools and students and parents. This is what they have to do. So KMOE provide a very big picture, very broad guidelines. And each regional school education offices or school districts, they have their government curriculum implementation plan, and they provide guidelines, very detailed guidelines. And they have to provide them or implement them in class within schools. And these are a lot of work, I heard. And they participate in various learning communities and adapt themselves to the new learning environment. Meaning, although teachers have a lot of experiences teaching in traditional classroom, they do not necessarily equip with the necessary competencies or necessary competencies on how to manage or operate online classes. So they have to learn themselves. And okay, I thought I wish I had to prepare for the online teacher training that are provided by the government, regional government, or voluntary teacher learning communities. So for example, they changed most of the teacher training programs or teacher training programs into online this year. And in order to provide certain experiences and information, government provided a website. They prepared the website called School On. And there are other websites that was voluntarily established. It was Teacher On. The Teacher On is they provide, if teachers have any difficulties, and they share the information and they give answers, and sometimes they provide real-time troubleshooting services and share the best practices. And this, I heard that this is a very effective way of improving teachers' capacities of online classes, regarding online classes. And at the same time, what regional offices and school commissioners notice is that the quality are so different depending on the teachers or depending on the schools or the organizational culture of the school. So what they did was they identify certain best practices of online classrooms. Sometimes they record it and they share that experiences to other schools. And sometimes they invite teachers who are very good at online teaching and help other school teachers to learn about that. Or sometimes they encourage teachers to participate in online classes, real-time online classes that are supposed to be the model cases. And through that kind of learning by doing methodologies, they carried out online classes. Because I was heard that I have only 8 minutes, I didn't really prepare a lot, but if you have any questions, I can give you information through email. And we have Korean government prepared the manuals and guidelines, maybe too many. So if you want to learn about the Korean responses to the regarding online classes under the COVID-19 pandemics, please contact me. Thank you. Hello.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kim, for your presentation. So now, with Dr. Kim's presentation finished, we will go ahead and take some time for question and answer sessions. It looks like we have a few questions already, operator. If you please share the slide of selected questions. We have 2 questions. The first one is for Dr. Edison Permin, and the second question will go to the rest 3 presenters, Dr. Kim, Dr. Kamolrat, and Dr. Din. The first one for Dr. Edison Permin. Can you give us an example of project-based learning? How does it differ from a modular approach? This is from Ms. Bella Mayu. Please.
Sure. Let me just share with you my screen, if I can do that, please. May I be allowed to share my screen now? I'll show you an actual sample that you can actually make use of in your respective institutions. So allow me to just access it. Somebody tell me if you can hear me now. Sorry, I got disconnected a little.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So sorry about that. Let me just transition back to the PowerPoint screen. So as I was saying earlier before we were cut, the distinction between project-based learning and module-based learning is quite easy to know. Remember that in projects, you need to be integrating several learning outcomes across courses or subjects, but modules are typically very much constrained only by learning outcomes per subject or course. In project-based learning, content is focused based on the learner's declaration of what he or she wants to learn or discover. And in modular learning, content is focused based on required reading. A lot of self-paced exploration happens in PBL, while in MBL or module-based learning, you still have a lot of guided and routine learning experiences. PBL is concentrated heavily on authentic and reflective assessments, while MBL is still heavy on formative and summative assessments. On the screen, I'm showing you what we call creating project-based learning units, where you integrate learning outcomes that are called from several disciplines and can create a context for meaningful learning. So here you see the learning outcomes of science, math, communication arts, social science, values education, and even entrepreneurship education. The goal of the teachers of these subjects is to engage students in real-life learning experiences where they get to solve problems even remotely. An example of which where all these learning outcomes can be learned is in the project-based learning unit, where they get to answer the question, what can you do with what is typically wasted as plant parts? So the context is created through that project, and this is the context that we did for the British Council some years back. It's entitled Food for Thought, Thought for Food, where the context says that we need to feed 9 billion people, and we put to waste every day a lot of fruit, vegetable parts which may have nutritive value. The question is, in what ways can they still be used? Now, someone also asked the question, how can you do remote laboratory learning experiences? This is my way of telling you that PBL is also an answer to remote laboratory learning experiences. Here, when the student is asked to create his or her project learning plan, take note, the experience is co-designed by the learner with the teacher. When the teacher prompts the student, here is the problem, what do you think will have to be known as concepts, and what would be some skills or procedures that you need to do to propose a solution to this problem? And then in terms of accessing content, let's say the students have realized one of the wasted plant parts typically out there is the core of the pineapple. The student can actually elect that project and research on why the core of the pineapple is important. So this is where a lot of self-paced exploration happens, especially when the student finds out that the core of the pineapple contains bromelain. It actually can help those people with some digestive problems, and even those who have some problems conceiving children. Do you know that when you eat the core of the pineapple, you increase the cervical mucus? Just a trivia that I want to share with you because I'm fond of science as well. So in this project, what happened was we used design thinking principles for the students to launch their projects. So it's not clear on your screen, but you're seeing the students experimented on their own recipes for creating something out of wasted plant parts. So they create the recipe. Remember, we're teaching via the communication arts procedural discourse, and this is where they get to use them. And then they carry out the experiment by finding out how they can extract something from the wasted plant parts. In this case, these students were extracting alternative flour from wasted plant parts, and they looked at the squash peel, the pineapple core, the sweet potato peel, and the mango peel. Ordinarily, in your laboratories, that's where they can do this. But in the comforts of their homes, they can also do these experiments on their own. And if they're lucky enough, they can actually create some food items from them. Like the alternative flour you extracted from these wasted plant parts that can be used for what we call squash peel cake, sweet potato cake, pineapple core cake, and mango peel cake. So no food is wasted. But wait, there's more. We did this remote learning experiences because we also want to engage the learners in adopting an entrepreneurial consciousness. SEAMEO is a champion of entrepreneurship education, and we support this cause. So we pose the question to the students, how will you introduce your project as a means of livelihood? What considerations for financing will be important? And how will this benefit your community? So at the end of the learning period, those learning outcomes are evidenced in terms of achievement using a portfolio. The portfolio is produced by the students, and that portfolio is transmitted to the school, to the teachers, and are evaluated. And from there, the learning continues. So this is my example of project-based learning, which also contains a lot of opportunities for doing remote scientific laboratory experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very comprehensive, Dr. Fermin. So next question for our three panelists. This is from Siti Ainah Maka Umbau. As a science teacher, laboratory activity is a part of curriculum. How can we possibly continue doing it by flexible learning? Any tips or alternative ideas? So may I call Professor Gml R first to answer the question?
Thank you so much for a very challenging question. Actually, I think that this question is could be kind of make it easy. First, I think that we need to, as the teacher or the facilitator, we need to understand all the change. So once we understand the change and then we accept the change, and then after that, the second step is we need to change our mindset. That right now the technology can be facilitate any kinds of the new learning system. So meaning that once the teacher change and then they accept the technology and innovation, and then the third one, they decide the learning ecosystem to make our learning ecosystem to be humanism and embedded technology into that. For example, that in the laboratory or the practice base, we decide the trainer at the project base. And then once we decide the trainer, and then we also decide the learning material to be more responsive to train the practices. For example, like how to change the mindset of the teacher from the previous physical training to be the virtual training or the virtual practice kind of that. So we are undergoing of experimented this challenging. So as I say in conclusion, that we change the mindset of the teacher, and then we decide the interactive and innovative pedagogy, and then we test along the way. We train all the ecosystem partner in the practice way, so everyone can participate and take part in that laboratory or practice space. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Professor Gml R. Now, can we hear the answer from Dr. Din Tuan Loh, please?
Yeah, this is the very. I think this is a very interesting question, and because for the laboratory activity, we all think that it's not easy to do the flexible learning for that kind of education. But in fact, there are many kind of laboratory action. For example, for science subject like IT, we think that we all think that for the IT we can easily do the flexible learning for students, because most of the activity happen in the computer, and we can make it. But for the other, for example, in Vietnam and even HOU, we also making some subject for cooking, and for this kind of subject, we try to make the content. We try to make the content to understand what the procedure to make something. For example, when the teacher cooking, when the teacher do the cooking, we take the video And besides the video, we have the guiding, the very detailed guiding to students. And after that, whenever we want to check the student need to record video by themselves to do something. And after that, they send the video to teacher, and the teacher can, based on the student's video, and give some recommend or something, some comment on the video. And after that, the student can gain experience by themselves. And I think that we cannot do all. We also think that we cannot do all, but most of them we can do some kind of flexible learning for that kind of subject. And for the high technology, we can make some simulation, some kind of 3D simulation, and or we can apply the AR, VR for that kind of subject. But I don't think it can be popular, because it requires the university need to invest more to make that kind of subject. But for most simple laboratory activity, we can try to do it through the video. So that's my idea about the laboratory teaching in a flexible way.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dean, for your response to the question. Now we will hear the next answer from Dr. Kim, please.
Okay. I would like to second what my Vietnamese colleague said. The very first thing I had in my mind was videotaping the step-by-step laboratory experience that done by teachers. And I saw one teacher actually collect some of the little insects or the plants to show students their functions and their features of those animals and plants. And if it is involved in chemical laboratory, any kind of experiments that has to be done in science classes, my first option would be the videotaping. And if you have a luxury of having certain number of students in class, if you don't have to collect every student in one classes, and then you can do the small group experiments with students. Yeah, that's something that I would do, that we would do in Korea, because I'm conducting higher education research, especially focusing on their learning, the process of teaching and learning. And one of the most challenging area of study is involving the practicum or the real practices in classes. And for those who are enrolled in education or enrolled in arts or the arts and musics, they have no choice but having the students one by one, having one-on-one lecture with the professor. And I think I'm very interested in what would happen, what it would be the students' experience as on staying home and do not participating in the in class learning. So that's it. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kim. It looks like we have no more time for question and answer session. Thank you for your interest and enthusiasm in joining our session. So, and also please excuse us for not being able to respond to our participants' comments and questions as we received so many in YouTube comment box. But we did best as we can. Yeah. So we are now moving to our next agenda, which is a closing remarks by Dr. Raimundo P. Arsiga, the Executive Director of ALCO Philippines. The floor is yours, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
A pleasant afternoon. everyone. And the time has come for us to finally close our program. And on behalf of our president of the Association of Local Colleges and Universities, Dr. Rene Colocar, and also on behalf of Dr. Laurel, the president of Lyceum of the Philippines University, where I'm presently working as resource person, we would like to thank SEAMEO, ALCO, and ACOCOA for hosting this kind of event. I hope you'll agree with me, for the last 6 weeks, we've been viewing a lot of discussions, seminar, talks about flexible learning. And today's session gave us a little confirmation whether what we've been doing the last 6 months, the last 6 weeks, is what we call flexible learning. Today's session, and I hope everyone will agree, gave us an opportunity to enhance our institutional framework on how we can implement flexible learning come August of 2019. Also, this session gave us confidence to draw the roadmap in the implementation of flexible learning. And most importantly, it helped us to reconcile differing thoughts on flexible learning. And I would want to believe, as I always tell my friend, Dr. Ed Fermin, we've discovered the vaccine to COVID-19 in higher education, even in basic education. Allow me to thank Dr. Carlo Magno. Thank you so much for allowing us to realize that flexible learning is not just about implementing it, that it's important for us to implement the same based on standards, that in developing the learning resources, in identifying pedagogy and in facilitating flexible learning, there is a standard that we have to comply with. We also would like to thank Dr. Paulina Panem for sharing with us that flexible learning is inviting everyone to implement the new learning process from learn, play, and eventually allow our students to research and produce. I'm also happy to hear from you, Dr. Paulina Panem, that it's not about how many technology we use, but how we use it. I like your proposition that we should be more engaged in constructivist pedagogy, differentiated strategy, and autonomous learning. And we're also happy to hear from you that no matter what happens, we have to ensure equity and access across all institutions. From Dr. Fermin, thank you for reminding us again that in implementing flexible learning, it can never be exactly the same from one institution to the other, because our flexible learning implementation will depend on the institutional priorities based on learning outcomes and based on the industry requirements. And since some schools are not all situated where you find the same industries, and not all students that you have right now are the same with that of other institutions, we have to put value on the institutional priorities, learning outcomes, and industry requirements. He also emphasized, thank you so much, Dr. Fermin, that today while we talk about outcomes, content, and experience, flexible learning is calling everyone to just put importance on what is essential outcome, what is essential content, and what is essential experience. For Dr. Kamal Rat, thank you for reminding us that flexible learning, nobody should be left behind. Flexible learning is about lifelong learning, and that flexible learning is what you call functional education with real value. Thank you also to Dr. Din Huang Long from Vietnam. Thank you for helping us realize also in the Philippines that the problem that we have right now is just the same with other ASEAN countries. Thank you for sharing with us the challenges, difficulties, reasons, and most importantly, the solutions to the challenges posed by COVID-19. And from Dr. Yu Yong Kim from Korea, thank you for reminding us that more than anything else, we have to ensure the health and safety of our students. And thank you for reminding us that we have to protect students' right to education access. Most importantly, Dr. Yong Kim, thank you for enumerating with us the new role of teachers, from learning contents, teaching in the class, from doing admin works, from linking education offices to other schools, districts, school students, and parents, and our obligation to participate in various learning activities to adapt ourselves to the new learning environment. There is only one thing clear, my dear participants. Teachers will not be replaced by technology, but teachers who do not use technology will be replaced by those who do. And let us be reminded that COVID-19 is about revolutionizing education. Revolution in education is necessary if we are to use the education in promoting equal opportunity and in building social capital. A revolution is necessary, according to Dr. Chavez. Even for good schools, the time to change is now. And change must not be merely reformative. It needs to be truly transformative, and that means revolutionary. Change has to be achieved first in the field of ideas, in our mindsets. Revolutionizing education, we must reconceive education. We must redefine learning, and so reinvent schooling. And I just hope all of us now, after attending the SEAMEO webinar with ALCU, are all willing to stage this revolution. A pleasant afternoon to everyone, and we wish everyone good luck as we embrace the new normal and as we implement the true meaning of flexible learning.
Okay, Dr. Raimundo. We cannot hear your voice, sorry. Dr. Raimundo.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
You haven't heard from the start?
No,
You have
it
not
was
heard?
just lost connection for a while, but now it's okay. You may continue.
I don't know where I stopped, where you stopped not hearing me. Sorry. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Yeah, again, as I've been telling everyone, this SEAMEO webinar with ALCU, can you hear me?
Yes.
Gave us the opportunity to enhance our institutional framework to proceed with flexible learning. This session also gave us more confidence to design roadmap in the implementation of flexible learning. And most importantly, the SEAMEO webinar with ALCU help us to reconcile differing perspectives and school of thoughts about the implementation of flexible learning. And you know what? I would want to believe that the session we have this morning gave us the opportunity to discover the vaccine to COVID-19 in education. Allow me to thank Dr. Carlo Magno. Thank you for reminding us that implementing flexible learning, we should be reminded that there's a standard that we have to follow, that the implementation should start from the learning resources and will end from the monitoring and evaluation. We would like also to thank Dr. Paulina Panem for reminding us that flexible learning should not be the same with what we used to do in the past. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And of course, thank you reminding us that the dual learning process, it's not about how many technology you use, but how we use it. And thank you, Dr. Paulina Panem, for telling us that in flexible learning, we have to embed the values of equity and access across all institutions. And
I'm
of
sorry,
course,
Dr. Raimundo. I think you are repeating all the your remarks. We have heard that.
so
I
clear,
think now the last part
teachers
that
will not be replaced by technology, but teachers who do not use technology will be replaced by those who do. And revolution in education is necessary if we are to use the education in promoting equal opportunity and in building social capital. A revolution, according to Dr. Chavez, is necessary. Even for good schools, the time to change is now. And change must not be merely reformative. It needs to be truly transformative, and that means revolutionary. Change has to be achieved first in the field of ideas, in our mindsets. Revolutionizing education, we must reconceive education. We must redefine learning, and so reinvent schooling. And thank you so much for all your willingness to stage this revolution. A pleasant afternoon to everyone, and we wish everyone good luck as you embrace the new normal and as you implement flexible learning in education. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think you also have helped to summarize our whole session too, yeah, very informative remarks. Now, may I hand over the session to Dr. Ethel, the Senior Secretariat Director, to deliver appreciation words. Please, ma'am, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much, ALCU, our partner in this joint webinar. This is actually our 10th webinar session. So let me just give a quick overview of this particular webinar session. We focus on flexible learning, as many are already asking about flexible learning options. So what we have gathered from all the speakers are really very good from the definition of Dr. Fermin. But let me just reiterate the flexible learning is a range of learning modes. You have a choice of when, where, and how the kids will learn. It can be synchronous, it can be asynchronous, e-learning, online, collaborative, computer-based, project-based learning, as discussed by our speaker, distance learning, computer-assisted learning. We also have other learning programs such as TV-based learning, radio-based learning. What we learned from Dr. Carlo today is emphasizing on quality for flexible learning programs. So how did the Philippines, like Dr. Carlo, set up these flexible learning plans, flexible learning standards in the light of preparation for Industry 4.0? Next, we also should learn about, next slide, flexible learning from Dr. Paulina by using flip-based, home-based learning option. Technology is not the only problem that we should think of, but how teachers will increasingly use technology. And in some instances, teachers also have to visit the learners, as in the case of Cambodia, in the case of Laos, okay? Autonomous learning and differentiated strategy. So you can make use of all the new learning paradigms that our speaker presented today. Well, you will always remember what Dr. Fermin said on the tips for doing flexible learning programs and capturing it with SEAMEO. It should be student-centered. It should be accessible. It should be adjusted to the context. It should maximize the content that everybody learns from this pandemic, learner engagement and assessment for learners that are applicable, and opening all lines of communication, whether you use, your Telegram, Facebook, and other sources. So I like the presentation of Dr. Fermin as well on product and process and place. I am touched by the presentation of Thailand because it's really for all, flexible learning for every ties. So it's about functional education with real value for their life and for their living. So they use hybrid training, MOOC platforms for everyone, farmers, students, lifelong learners. Next. From Hanoi, well, the Hanoi Open University presentation give us all the benefits of online learning, but also challenges, which I think all of us face because of, not being prepared for online learning. While you use social network, you can manage your online classroom, but some children could not really focus on flexible learning modalities. There is no understanding sometimes because actually the teachers could really not be replaced. Face-to-face teaching is really something that is important. But given the situation we are in, there are solutions according to Hanoi Open University. You can use all the available platforms, Google, Moodles, and Moodle, all of these that, at the open universities, they consistently use. But we also have to think about, assessment and learning at this time. So Dr. Dean presented opportunities for online training for teachers who would like to better understand how to do it. So you can look at our CBooks because we also offer some global digital literacy concepts there. And please visit our online resources, which we co-share with Hana Open University. Dr. Kim, you have given me an information that, Korea also invested on public infrastructure, which is actually a concern of all Southeast Asian. And even using TV channels for this particular COVID-19 pandemic situation and response for flexible learning. And your government also offers free online courses and expanded e-learning sites. Wow, that's really good from the whole government approach to flexible learning, that there is support from infrastructure to TV channels and online learning. And by the way, the key message here is whenever you select the flexible learning, you should think of the appropriate pedagogy, the appropriate platform or space, and the appropriate technology. So because many schools have already tried, adjusting to Industry 4.0, but now it was pushed because of the pandemic. We are transitioning, but at the same time, it's so fast. So I think that everybody should be adaptable, that the situation should be flexible, that we should always consider whatever is the appropriate context that will be used for flexible learning. Please visit our open educational resources, our online resources. There are a lot of information on flexible learning shared by our partners and SEAMEO Secretariat. And actually, all of us are learning because this pandemic never happened before. So the learning curve is there, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ethel, for the synthesis and the key messages. Yeah, and my high appreciation also goes to all of our speakers who have presented today and enlightened all participants with good sharing of practices of flexible and technology-mediated learning in their countries. Yeah, hopefully it will inspire all educators who join this webinar to implement in their own institutions. Now, before we close this event, may I invite my colleague Rafi from SEAMEO Secretariat to share about the webinar certificate. Please, Rafi.
Thank you so much, Ali. So I know that most of our participants on YouTube are asking about our e-certificate. So allow me to share the process of securing the e-certificate for this webinar. First, participants will need to fill up the certificate validation and assessment form after watching the webinar. So you can see the link on the lower right part of the screen together with the QR code. And you will need to provide us a reflection on how to apply the knowledge from this webinar, 50 to 150 words. So when you click that link, you will be taken to an online form where you will submit a reflection. The third bullet is very important. Please ensure that the spelling of your full name and email address are both correct prior to submission, because we will be basing your e-certificate on your full name, and we will be sending it using the email address that you have given us. The e-certificate will be sent to your email on or before the 31 of July 2020. And please note that the deadline to submit the reflection is on June 24, 11 p.m., and that is Bangkok time. And for inquiries, please email us at webinar@seameo.org. So we'd also like to invite all our participants to log in and register for our next webinar on embracing new normal and the future of work. So this will be on June 25, 2020, 10 a.m. to 11:30. This time it is GMT +7. So to our participants in Manila, in Singapore, in Malaysia, that will be on a different time because we are on GMT +8. So the registration link can also be seen on the lower left part together with the QR code and the live on YouTube link. Thank you so much for participating in our SEAMEO webinar series, and we hope to see you next week for another learning session. Thank you, and good morning or good afternoon wherever our participants may be. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you also. Thank you, Ma'am.